I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarland. Today is Friday, May 19th, 2023. And if it's Friday, it's the Healing Circle. We talk with our friends and leaders in the field of health and mental health, whole body health. Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya, the leader at the African American Child Wellness Institute. We talk with Dr. Oliver Williams, who is with the Institute, was with the founder of the Institute on Black Domestic Abuse in Minnesota, a professor at the University of Minnesota, a renowned speaker on the question of health, healing, violence prevention in our community. And today we're going to be joined by Dr. Kalena Peterson, who's the clinical director at the African American Child Wellness Institute. Got a great program, a great topic. I want to begin by welcoming and thanking Minnesota Department of Health as a sponsor and for their choosing this platform to keep our community, to keep you informed about the need to be COVID aware, the need to be vaccinated, and the need to follow protocols. Though the COVID emergency has been declared over, they are inviting all of us to continue to pay attention, to learn, to get the information you need to keep yourself and your family safe. By all means, keep testing. By all means, get vaccinated as is suggested by the Minnesota Department of Health. Thank them for their sponsorship, and we'll talk about that again later on in the program. As always, I want to invite all of you who are listening on any platform to support this work. You can support us by going to our YouTube channel, YouTube Inside News MN, and becoming a subscriber. We'd love for you to also like the program and share it to your friends. Now, I remind you that we are available across a variety of platforms. Our goal is to be as available as we can be to as many people as we can in the community, in the digisphere. So we are partnered with the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, in presenting this on Black Press USA's US YouTube channel. As I said, we're also presenting this live on the Inside News YouTube channel. But we're also on 3 Facebook platforms. There's my personal platform, Al McFarland, Facebook. There's the Inside News Facebook channel, and there's also Black Press USA Facebook. If you're on any of those channels, thank you for being here. Drop us a note in the comment section. Let us know who you are, where you are. Like my friend Michelle Madison has just done. Greetings, Sister Michelle. Thank you so much for always being a part of our program and for spreading the word. Finally, we are on both Twitter, the Inside News Twitter account, and we are on LinkedIn. So if you're a LinkedIn person, several of you talk to me from time to time saying you monitor the program on LinkedIn. I thank you. However you're engaging, take a minute to go to YouTube Inside News MN and become a subscriber. Help us grow our subscription base. What is our goal? Our goal is to get 1,000 people. We want to move to where this engagement can be monetized to support more engagement, more presentations, more analysis, more of our being together to build community. Well, with that, I want to first of all say that our topic today is a great topic. It's kind of a heavy duty topic. You know, in February of this year, the Minnesota House passed a bill to create an Office of Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls. It was the first of its kind in the country. But then in the past few days, in New York City, 2 Black boys were discovered missing. One was found dead. And so today's program is looking at that, you know, the question of the state taking action to focus on valuing the lives of the missing and murdered Black women, but how we as a community and how the state also looks at all of our children, all of our lives. And I want to talk about this incident in New York. It's heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, and the question is, what do we do? And so the question is further elevated when we want to look at what happens with a parent when a parent experiences the loss of his or her child? What does that do to the parent physically, biologically, psychologically? We want to go into that today. So, in fact, before I bring in my co-hosts and partners, I want to share this video that comes out of New York. And let me say that this becomes personal for all of us because our producer is in the neighborhood where this scene unfolds, and so it's personal to her. It's personal to us as well. Check this out.
Last seen in Harlem on Friday. Last seen with his friend, 13-year-old Garrett Warren, whose body was found today in the East River. It's the kind of pain and tragedy that horrifies every parent. With the searchers tonight, here's Josh Eininger.
Tonight, a drone patrolled the sky over the Harlem River. Detectives on shore glued to its camera feed for any sign of a child's body near the surface. And police boats floated around in circles not far away, just in case. This is the team that hours earlier spotted the remains of 13-year-old Garrett Warren. And a few blocks away, family members who'd been clinging to hope collapsed to the sidewalk in agony.
Everybody's overwhelmed with grief at this time.
Garrett and his 11-year-old friend Alpha Barry have been missing since last Friday, when the pair passed under a surveillance camera near a playground at 143rd and Lenox. That night, someone reported seeing two kids fall into the nearby Harlem River, but an extensive search at the time yielded nothing. And for days, there was no sign of either boy in the neighborhood or in the river, where NYPD divers have staged a methodical round-the-clock search as the families hung on every potential lead.
We know nothing. It's just a big question mark. Where did they go? We don't know. We don't know.
And when it turned out that body was Garrett's, Alpha's family was still passing out flyers in the neighborhood as if to will away the growing likelihood that he, like his friend, may never come home.
Well, that's a gripping story, a sad story, but it makes us think, both with compassion for that family and that community, but you think about your own self, your own children, and what your duty is, your obligation is for being connected, being safe, for being sure, as sure as you can possibly be. And you have to think about what if that happened to you? What if it's your son, your daughter, your loved one who is lost, missing, murdered? Well, it's a big topic. That's what we'll get into today. I'm going to share a couple of articles after we get going, and our panel will go through those. But I want to begin by inviting Dr. B, Dr. Bravada, Garrett-Akinsanya, if she's here, to set us up and to welcome and begin the program, the Healing Circle, with the protocol. Is Dr. B still here? She was here a second ago. She might be trying to get, okay. Then I'm going to pass this duty to you, Dr. Oliver Williams. We have come up with a wonderful protocol led by Dr. B, but I'll ask you to take the honor and do the duty of talking about the Healing Circle and how we execute this conversation every week.
Well, good morning or afternoon, I guess. And my understanding of the Healing Circle and the geometric figure in particular is the fact that what you can do is you can see one another when you're in a circle, and what you can do is a circle sort of defines some level of equality. Mm-hmm. And among the things that you can get within a healing circle is the opportunity to be able to communicate with each other. It also symbolizes equality. Another thing that you can think of with regard to the healing circle is the fact that it doesn't begin or end. It just continues. And one of the things that Dr. B talks about is the fact that we end up looking at the different people who are in the circle. And what we do is we honor the people in the circle, but we also honor our elders. And as we honor our elders, we also recognize our elders are the closest to God. So what we do is that we have the opportunity to be able to share the stick and pass the stick around in different communities. Being able to communicate in this fashion is something that's rather important, but you end up getting a chance to listen to what other people have to say, but then you can call for the stick.
Mhm.
And then you can pass the stick to someone else or ask for it back. But it gives an opportunity for people to be heard. And sometimes that's really, really important for us to be able to do. So I'm not doing it as well as Dr. B, but that's my interpretation of why the healing circle is important. So I'll pass it back to you, brother.
Well, thank you, Dr. Oliver Williams. And I see Dr. B is coming in and out, but I see she's back now. Dr. B, good afternoon. Welcome to the Healing Circle. And you can give me and Dr. Williams a grade on how he has presented the protocol of the talking stick and the healing circle.
I think you got it. A+.
All right.
Let's do one more thing, and that's invite Dr. Kalena Peterson. Let's have her come on board and have you introduce her. This is her first time here with us, I believe. And Dr. Kalena, welcome to the Healing Circle, and we're so glad to share your voice and your vision. But Dr. B, why don't you introduce her?
Live from the state of Illinois in Chicago, we have Dr. Kalena Peterson. She's a very skilled clinical psychologist. She was one of my, I call myself her psychology mother. She's one of my previous trainees, and she's extremely talented and resourceful and brilliant in her way of working with African-American children and families. And she, more than anything, she is my assistant clinic director.
All right.
The first of her kind. Yay, there we go. So passing the talking stick to Dr. Kalena Peterson to say, hey, here you go, sister. Welcome to the circle.
Thank you, Dr. B. Thank you for that gracious, glorious introduction. I'm happy to be here. I've been trying to get here for a couple months now, but they've had me busy. So I'm just glad to be a part of the conversation and discussion today. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Now you have to pass the talking stick to somebody.
Oh, yes, and I'm passing it back to you, Brother Al.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kalena. Well, I'm going to, before we go deep into our subject today, take a little bit more time to have you introduce yourself and your work, your training. Where are you coming from in this work, and where are you going in this work? In fact, what is the work that you have chosen to undertake? What is the mission that you seek to fulfill as a professional in this field?
Sure. So I started out obtaining my master's degree in psychology. I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist, and that was what I was pursuing. And then along that journey, I was introduced to Dr. B through one of my practicum supervisors while I was in the master's program. And it kind of changed the course of my professional career and my personal life as well. I started working with Dr. B, and at that time she was the president of the Minnesota Psychological Association. She was a consultant in the community. She had a private practice. She was mentoring and training other young psychologists and master's levels clinicians. She kind of took me under her wing and ultimately encouraged me to pursue my doctoral degree, which is something I had not planned to do at all. But yeah, she was kind of the blueprint and the role model for me. And just seeing the impact she was able to make in the community and in people's lives on an individual level and, collective level in the community, it was very inspiring and motivating for me, and inspired me to kind of want to do the same thing. So we packed me up and moved me back home. I'm originally from Gary, Indiana. I've spent the last 15 years or so in Chicago, Illinois, where I was trained in my doctoral program, and all of my training experiences have been in community mental health. So working with Black and Brown communities in all sorts of settings, hospitals and correctional facilities, and then ultimately in private practice. And I got a call from Dr. B to come back here, and she made it a really appetizing offer for me. And it's really full circle now. I'm here, I'm her assistant clinic director, and the vision is to continue to grow and develop ACWI and the work that we are doing here, serving African Americans and people of the African diaspora in the best way we can, but mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and in all ways that our people need. So that is the vision I plan to continue to carry out here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I'll take the stick back. Well, let me do this and sort of move us into the topic today. And the theme was, what does the loss of a child do to parents physically, psychologically, biologically? And I'm looking at an article in a publication called Fatherly by that title. The title is actually what does the loss of a child, what the loss of a child does to parents psychologically and biologically. And it's written by Joshua Kirsch, updated July of 22, originally published in January of 2019. And, the sub headline says, though parents mourning the death of a child experience classic psychological, biological, and social grief responses, there are unique challenges. He starts the article by saying, the loss of a child may be the worst trauma a human being can experience. Though it's not a terribly common experience in the US, that is, there are about 10,000 children between the ages of 1 and 14 who died in 2018. The horrific potential for losing a child looms large. And although reassuring, numbers may make plain why the death of a child brings so much grief and why it is so feared, so painful, and so stigmatized. The article goes on to cover several topics or headlines, and I'll read the headlines and have our guests weigh in on our partners, our physicians weigh in on these topics. One subtitle in the article talks about biological impacts. How does the death of a child change a parent's body? And I hadn't thought about that, but perhaps our experts can discuss that. The second theme is how or what psychological impacts there are, how the trauma of losing a child harms the psyche. Then the third big item or direction in the article is predictors, how the age of a child and other factors impact grieving parents. And the last that I'll mention is social impacts, how the loss of a child either strengthens or ruins families. There are others having to do with, last one, coping, how to seek comfort after the death of a child. So I sort of set out some things that we want to discuss right now. And just to lead into that and take it wherever you want to, I'm going to pass the talking stick to Dr. Oliver Williams, because you've done work in this area, as I think all of you have. But Dr. Williams, let me begin with you. Here's the talking stick.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Al. As I think about this, the first thing that comes to my mind is the age of the child. So if you have children, and I know people may have different perspectives about it, but if you have miscarriages, some people take those things quite seriously and are affected by it. I know that in my family, we've had to deal with the challenge associated with that. And it's something that has stayed with me for a period of time, and for my wife for a period of time. We talk about this in the articles. They talked about the issue of grief and how you carry that with you for a while. I remember for a period of time, as I went through it, and then as my wife went through it, there was a period of time when there was she turned internally, I think, to be able to go through the process of healing. And there wasn't as many things. So when you have a pregnancy, you don't think about the loss of a child, because you want to be optimistic and feel for the hope of what you're about to um, experience. But it happens too often, that mothers oftentimes lose their child. And some people may not think of it in the same way. Now, I'm for a woman's right to choose what she wants to do in terms of dealing with an abortion. But if you have a child that is that doesn't go full term, that can be a devastating experience, and it takes a while to be able to recover from. And so that's and I think that there's an opportunity to be able to talk about that. There are nurses, there are people who write about it, who talk about the experience and help people to process it. I remember when long time ago, Sonia and I went through the process, and there's a colleague of mine who had gone through it, and it was a dean of a university I used to teach at and outside of Minnesota. And she talked about how it affected her and her husband for a period of time. So again, we're talking about the loss of a child during pregnancy. And so the next stage that I think about too is adulthood, or not adulthood, but an older child. If you have a child that like this 13-year-old ones that were talked about in the article. The thing that I think about with that is the fact that you have an experience with a human being that you've exchanged some emotional connection with. And having that history is something that's can affect someone as well. And people can feel a loss in a different way. And I think we have to appreciate that. I had have a friend whose son was killed, adolescent was killed, and saw how it affected her. And the one thing I think about is the mothers that get together whose children have been killed, and either due to gangs or something that exists within various communities, the loss of a child, and how they get together to be supportive of one another. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit and talk about the fact that that's also a way to be able to heal, is when people get a chance to get together who have this common experience that, and it's like in relationships too, who people may not understand the impact of that circumstance because it doesn't happen to everybody, and it can be hurtful and painful, but one finds support from making connections with other people. And that's why I think groups can be important, whether you're dealing with the loss of a baby, or if you're dealing with a miscarriage, or if you're dealing with the loss of a child that was taken due to homicide that exists in the community. Finding support is something that's real important for one to be able to do, to be able to deal with the challenges of those things. And in the research that we were looking at, they were talking about having conversations about, you know, how one can be affected emotionally, psychologically, and physically as a consequence of dealing with the loss of a child. And I think that those are things that we need to have conversations about and find ways to be able to seek help for and to deal with the trauma of the experience, but also to recognize that it has a real impact in terms of the consequences to families and to individuals who go through it. So with that, I'll pass the talking stick to Dr. B. You're on mute.
I said, thank you, brother. I was going to ask for it too.
Oh.
I'm glad you passed it on. So many things went through my mind as you were talking. And I do think that the context in which a child is born impacts a great deal the way a parent may mourn that child. And thinking about women who have to do IVF, in vitro fertilization, and the enormous expense that comes to, and having to take shots and all of the monitoring and all the extra effort people put to have babies. And then you maybe hold the baby for a month or two and you lose the baby. You have to go back again, trying to get eggs and fertilize them. It's just really rough. I also think about my great grandma Alice. Before we even had any of this fancy science, my grandma Alice had 13 children, and all of them died except 2. And understanding now the genetic nature of her body holding that pain every time she got pregnant, it was grief. Every time she hoped, she lost hope. And only 2 times did she have babies. And one was my grandmother, and one was my aunt, my great aunt, her sister. And the way they were so cherished by my great grandmother, and how they continued to be loyal with her until the day she died, because they had each other. And my grandpa was an alcoholic. He died early of cirrhosis of the liver. And my great grandpa was an alcoholic, her husband. And she still raised him and went through that grief. So I think about what it means. And then I think about some people I see now in therapy whose children are killed and gunned down, like last summer. So many babies shot in the brain, on a trampoline, in the car, getting McDonald's, just killed and murdered. And a couple of the parents I got to get to know through therapy and through referral and just through visiting with them. And I know when a parent loses a child, it's feels like a bottomless pit in not just in your heart, in your whole soul. That is what we call a soul wound, because you're not just losing a baby, you're losing the hope of what they could be and who they could become.
Right.
And in the last part, I think I want to address, when we talk about this grief and this tremendous impact it has on their bodies, is that I've seen women lose babies, and fathers as well, that all they felt was rage, and the only thing they could do is hit and break things. That's all they could do, because they couldn't even verbalize the pain that they experienced and the anguish and the anger that they experienced at losing a baby. And a part of that process, I think, makes parents struggle harder when they know they've lost a baby, and for the rest of them to be attentive to the living ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder for the parents to do that. And I always just think about the fact that when they lose babies, that no parent should bury a child. And in my husband's culture, if a parent loses a baby, they don't even go to the funeral. Their soul can't bear putting that baby in the ground, so they have to have someone represent them at the burial. That is how impactful and grievous it is to lose a child. And that's why only cleaving to people around you, only having friends and family who just repeat to you you're loving, you're loved, that you are a good mother, you're a good father, just letting them be in that space of understanding and making meaning of that severe loss. So with that said, I'm going to pass the talking stick on to Dr. Kalena. I'm sure she's got some thoughts about this as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just kind of want to echo on a couple of things that you and Dr. Oliver said, Dr. B. You spoke about holding pain in their bodies, and I think that's something that if you haven't experienced that, that kind of a loss, that no one can really like relate to it in the way that you are experiencing it. And it has biological effects on you, like immune and all kinds of things that are happening internally that we can't see. It's invisible, right? So then there's that, the physical pain. And then there's, women carry babies for 36, 40 weeks. And you have all these hopes and dreams about what they'll be like when they grow up, and just all of this like into this human that you're creating. And then to lose it, whether the baby is stillborn or a miscarriage, or the baby's 11 and 13 and it's tragically taken from you. That is a loss like no other. And yes, it affects the fathers too. Fathers have their own grieving experiences. They don't carry babies, but they are also waiting and wishing and wanting for this child to be, something to be in the world. And where does that go when you lose a baby, right? Or lose a child. And also, this is just against the natural cycle of life, right? Like what Dr. B was saying. Parents shouldn't be burying their babies or their children. It's the opposite. We're supposed to bury our elders and our parents. And so there is no script or a book to help really like capture what that's like, or to make it better, or there's no pill and there's no this. And so it does matter. Mental health care is so important during those times. Even sometimes families don't understand. Your closest people don't understand if they haven't experienced it themselves. It's a hole that cannot be filled. It is a soul wound. But you absolutely can do things to like help you get to a space of acceptance, which is one of the final stages of grief that we're taught. But that could be a long journey. And that's not the end of it. Just because you come to that doesn't mean that, oh, it's all better. And, that is a person and a human that you've created in whatever way, whether natural birth, whether adoption. People wait to adopt babies for years, or people spend a lot of money to have a baby via IVF or fertility ways. So yeah, this is a much needed area of conversation. And I just want to encourage people who have experienced it, or you have loved ones who, to continue to encourage mental health care for these things, and to be a source of support, and to honor and respect the space that people who are grieving the loss of children are in. And I'll pass the stick back to Brother Al.
Thank you. We put together 4 or 5 questions, our producer did, that we should cover over the course of the conversation. And let me kind of throw them all out and invite you all to react to or respond to any part of any of the questions. And in the process, we'll weave a conversation that I think ties everything together. But the talking points we came into today's program with include these three. One was, and you were just talking about this, Dr. Kalena, how does the physical and emotional stress of losing a child manifest in a parent's body? And what are some of the long-term health effects that have been observed in bereaved parents? How can understanding these biological impacts help in providing better support and care for grieving parents? I'm just imagining right now the people we saw in that news clip at the beginning of the show with, like Friday, as I recall the report, the community rallying, trying to find two young boys that are missing, and over the weekend doing leafleting and flyering. And as the flyering is being done, the bodies of one of the children is found. I just wonder what is the level of devastation and emotional horror, pain that family and those around that family are feeling. So the second question, considering the psychological impacts of losing a child, how do we discuss the differences between grief and depression and chronic grief? How do we, and what's the value in recognizing these distinctions and how recognizing them can aid in addressing the unique mental health challenges faced by parents who've experienced such a loss? I'm going to throw the last question in, and then I'll pass the talk back to Dr. B, and we can just have the conversation unfold as it would like to. So the last question that we wrote in preparation for the program was, in light of the research indicating that recovery from grief may not be related to the amount of time since a child's death, what are some of the potential coping strategies or interventions that could be beneficial for parents who continue to struggle with the psychological impacts of their loss? How can society and mental health professionals better support these individuals in their healing journey? And while we were talking about this, I pulled up one of our covers of Insight News. I'm going to see if I can share this quickly here. And then I'll pass the talking stick to Dr. B. But it just reminded me, of how difficult and how much pain there is. This is a cover of Insight where we're addressing the fact that these children were killed by stray bullets. You all remember that several years ago, and that's community activist K.G. Wilson there with a picture of his granddaughter, Anya Allen, and her grandpa, K.G. Wilson. And then also at the same time, Lad Devon, Garrett Jr., Trinity Alderson, all killed by, senseless gun violence in our community. So this topic is around us all the time. I'm going to stop there, and Dr. B, I'm handing the talking stick back to you.
Thank you. Those are the kids I was referencing earlier. And I think that when we talk about grief, knowing that grief is not a linear process. So we always refer to this woman, Kubler-Ross, in her research about the stages of grief. And what she's saying is you first are going to feel shock, and then you're going to be in denial that it didn't happen. You go through stages of negotiating and depression and hopelessness. But I also know that there's a session where you kind of obsess about what could I have done, or maybe this is what's happening. So you play all these different things, scenarios, in what you could have done or what could be possible. So I'm sure the parents who were looking for the babies, who had told that their children had seen them get into the water or slide into the water, I'm thinking they probably thought maybe he'll turn up, he can swim a little bit, maybe somebody grabbed him, or all of these things go through your mind so that you don't lose hope. And so I'm thinking about the parents right now who are listening, who have lost their children for whatever the context is, and that idea of looking at how you carry that woundedness in your body and how you don't want to eat, or you may overeat, or you don't want to drink, or you may overdrink, or you don't want to sleep, or you may oversleep. So all of these different aspects come up, and your immune system is shot to heck. You can easily get sick, and so all of these are going on, and often in the midst of having other children. That's the part I always want people to remember. If you lose a child, the likelihood is you got some more around you, whether they're your biological children or other children in your life. They're around you, and it's hard to pay a lot of attention to their need in the grieving process when the parent is so debilitated by the loss. And so one of the things I hope we get to talk more about before we get out is the coping strategy. And I think one of the first ones is to remember that I tell parents that you never stop being a parent, even when your child dies. So you're still a parent, whether that means you're using their death to educate other parents, that it makes meaning that my children couldn't swim, so I will teach others to swim, or I'll fund that, or my child died of cancer, I'm going to do walks for cancer, or my child died by suicide, then I'm going to do something about teaching others not to ignore the symptoms of suicide in their children. So parents can often begin their healing process by making meaning of their children's loss, of the loss of their children, and turning that energy into something that can be helpful and healing for them and others. And with that, I think I'll pass the talking stick to Dr. Kalena, and then we'll go back to Dr. Oliver.
Thank you, Dr. B. So yeah, I was thinking kind of along the same lines of finding ways to honor the loss. I think can be so meaningful, and to make meaning out of the loss, which is pretty important. I think it's easy for people who haven't experienced the loss to the effect or capacity that the parent have, or easy, like, not dismiss, but in a way, people move on, they move on with their lives, and the parents, the mothers, especially, are still left, with that hole and that emptiness. And so I think finding a way to kind of rechannel that energy and that sadness and that deep sense of loss, it could be really important. And yeah, just back to the devastation of what this kind of loss leaves to a person's life. And Dr. B mentioned you have other kids that you still have to pour into, and to, keep healthy and keep alive, and make sure they're okay, while you're still dealing with the ripple effects, the vast ripple effects of the loss. And so that's a lot for parents to be holding, and trying to compartmentalize so they can be present while they're also attending to this loss. And that is a hard thing to do. It's almost inhumane to expect, and then people have to work, right? You don't get to just pause life. So you still have to be providing for a family financially and otherwise. So sometimes grief takes the back seat, or it just kind of it's something that's sitting next to you every day while you're still, in some autopilot way, in which is where I think that we come in, and why the work that we do is so important, so that they can have a space to just cry, or to say how sad this is, or how no one's even checking in anymore about this thing, and that hurts. And so there's so many components and layers and variables to loss that I think are important and need attention, and should be where we come into to help heal our community.
Dr. Kalena, let me ask you to take a minute to define the distinction between grief and trauma. Are they the same? Are they different?
I think loss is a trauma. I believe that. I do think that when people experience this kind of loss, it does threaten your own sense of safety and self, and that is kind of what a trauma is, right? So I think of grief in terms of as a traumatic event. even when you're expecting to lose someone, like they have a chronic illness or, stage 4 cancer or, these things, or, there's a timeline, again, like death is such a thing that's indescribable and different for every person who experiences it, that I think it has the effects of like a trauma. It creates severe depression and anxiety and the symptoms related to those things, insomnia, hypersomnia, like things that Dr. B was just kind of running down for us in the list. So yeah, I don't know that there's for me personally and professionally, I don't think that there's a distinction between trauma and grief. Grief is a traumatic experience.
Okay.
Miss Dr. Oliver.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I wanted to give you some references. So there's, as Dr. B said, there's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talks about grief, but we have a local expert too, Dr. Paul Rosenblatt, who was in the School of Family Social Science at the University of Minnesota. He's retired now, emeritus professor. But he has had written about grief and the process, also looking at in terms of diversity as well, talking about it in the context of, Black families versus, other communities. I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about too, in terms of dealing with loss, is that Native American women, but in particular African American women and children, don't get as much press around the issue of loss due to homicide or abduction. And, that is something that we need to get our heads around as well. And we need to figure out a way to be able to get more attention to. And I understand that there's a bill that by Congresswoman Representative Richardson that had been developed to be able to look at the issue of the loss of and the abductions of Black women. But it's also a case within the Native American community where that they have been abducted and that there isn't as much attention given to it or responses compared to white women. And so it's all bad, but we need to figure out a way to be able to get more attention to it and more responses to dealing with the issue. Meeting, there are people in our community that have lost children due to gun violence. Mm-hmm. It rips at my gut. Let me say that, in terms of dealing with this sadness or dealing with it because of some foolishness. I have a friend in DC who lost a niece because young women have to negotiate an interesting, depending on where they live, negotiate an interesting pattern, because if you give somebody too much attention, as young boys might try to, get attention from young women, she's got to negotiate an interesting road. And if she gives them too much attention, on the one hand, that people may feel as though they can take too much liberty. But in this other circumstance, she tried to be clear that she wasn't interested. And the young man came back and shot at her house and killed her. And the damage that did to her family, and the consequences that they had to live with. And I'm thinking of another person that's a friend that had a similar experience where a family member went out in a different city and a homicide occurred. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do we, on the one hand, recognize it, but then how do we build support to be able to address those issues. And there's a guy named Mark Umbright, who's an emeritus professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota, who deals with mediation. And he's had programs on HBO that dealt with it, where, you know, there were people who were harmed, and they had the victims or victims' families meet with the person that did the harm. And my friend, Dr. Bob Geffner, has this Institute for Violence, Abuse, and Trauma. And he has these conferences annually. And one of the people that he dealt with had a son that was killed by this man. And over time, one of the things that happened was that the father ended up making a connection with this guy and found a way to be able to deal with his anger, grief, and frustration, but to confront this guy about the impact of his behavior. And the person started to take responsibility for it. And then they go around the country to be able to do work together, to be able to help other people and families who deal with those challenges. And what's, I guess, the theme that I think is important in terms of dealing with this is being able to make connections with other human beings who've either had some association with it, can hear you. I know, you know, as you have churches that deal with domestic violence or deal with suicide, the first thing that you got to do is get people to recognize what's going on. And then the next thing that you've got to do is to teach people on how to hear, how to listen to what's going on. And then we talk about the steps that it takes to be able to take what I call the journey to healing, you know, in that process. And groups, you know, to me is an interesting thing, because as we talked about groups on this program before, when you end up identifying what the purpose of the group is, you know, that helps to identify who should be present at that event, as people get a chance to sort of dialogue, but understand and reveal to themselves and with others, you know, what's going on. And with that, I'm going to pass the talking stick back to you, Brother Al.
Well, you know, you mentioned the legislation issue, and I wanted to share that. I had one of that pulled up in February. I think the Minnesota State House passed a bill proposing to create the first Office of Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls in the U.S. And the bill passed in the House with 110 in favor and 19 opposed, but for it to become law, it has to be approved by the Senate and signed by Governor Tim Walz. Now, I'm not sure if that's gone to the Senate already, or if that'll be brought into completion. We have, 3 or 4 days left in the current session. But in summary, and speaking to the points you made, Dr. Oliver, Black women in Minnesota have nearly tripled the murder rate of white women, according to a state report by the Missing and Murdered African American Task Force. And they said in an interview on Minnesota Public Radio, at least the author of the bill, you referenced Representative Ruth Richardson, said that domestic violence, with domestic violence, Black women make up 7% of our state's population, but more than 40% of reported domestic violence cases. So that's huge. The article goes on to say that an estimated 60,000 Black women are missing in the United States. The Minnesota Missing and Murdered African American Task Force study found that Black women, as I said earlier, are 3 times more likely to be murdered than a white woman or white woman in Minnesota. And it said that investigations into the murders of Black women and girls take 4 times as long as those into the murders of white women and girls. So structural imbalance here. It says the research suggests that less attention is paid to the disappearance and murder of Black women than of other white women in the national media. So what do we do about that? On the one hand, we're saying that we know that there is a sort of official, formal, de facto callousness about Black life, a willingness to say Black pain isn't pain. That reminds me that when our youngest daughter was born, the doctors that we didn't know because we were young provided an episiotomy, I think is the procedure, but didn't tell us, and discovered it sometime after the birth when stitches, came out in the caring of my wife's body. But the point is that there's a certain cultural callousness, arrogance, and a presumption that it's okay for my wife, for a Black person to experience pain. Pain doesn't matter to us, or for them to experiment on how much pain we can take. So that shows up in how a community does or doesn't react to the horrific loss of these children in New York, to other incidences of violence against children, violence against women in our community. What do we do about it? It said that if the national media doesn't pay attention, my question to us is, what is our responsibility to ourselves and to our own children, to our families, and to our future? I'm going to pass that back to you, Dr. B.
Oh, I know we only got like a few seconds or a minute or less, but I love closing on this idea that the responsibility belongs to all of us. And for us as people of color, Black women in particular, our voice needs to be heard. But how you they take their time to fight for us because we're invisible. So how are you going to find somebody who's invisible before they're even lost? So one of the things I'd like to pose to this group is, let's revisit this topic and give it a lot more discussion so that we can get the truth out about Black women, Black girls, especially trans girls, trans women. What we can get the truth out about what we need to do. Because in the end, everybody is somebody's child.
That's right.
And with that, I think I'll say that's all I got for today. And all children deserve healing, and all parents deserve healing.
Well, listen, thank you, Dr. B. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. As always, a wonderful conversation. And we sort of reflecting what we should be talking about all the time, everywhere. Let's continue, Dr. B, as you say, this conversation, and let's try to bring other people into it as well. I think it's our duty, it's our business, and we have a responsibility to ourselves, our families, and to the future. With that, thank you for being here. Again, special thanks to the Minnesota Department of Health, their COVID-19 community engagement and diverse media strategy that we are part of. We thank them for providing underwriting for this program. We'll tell you about that more as we go in the future. I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.